So what are other misconceptions within the field that you hear about all the time that you'd like
Yes.
to put to bed?
Yeah. So one is that boys talk later than girls. So I hear this one a lot. And lots of times families will call into my practice and they'll say, like we talked to their teacher, we talked to, our pediatrician, and they said, just kind of like hang tight because, eventually he'll talk because, just give him a couple more months because boys talk later than girls. And I think it's one of those myths where like, it's the person probably read it as a big headline somewhere, kind of like when you read a big headline that summarizes the research, but then you don't actually go to read into the article to learn a little bit more about the
Yeah, it's like
headline.
the eye catcher. Yeah.
Exactly. So it is kind of the eye catcher. And so here's what this research is actually, right? So boys within the normal range of when first words are supposed to come, boys will be in the later end of normal than girls, right? So if we're expecting children, right, to talk sometime or to say their first words between 12 to 14 months, girls might say it closer to 12 months and then boys might say closer to 14 months, but it's still within the range of normal. So the late that people are talking about where it's kind of like misconstrued is only by like a few months, right? Like about 2 months. It's really a short amount of time. So we're not expecting, right? If you have a son and his language is really delayed, right? And like really delayed by months and months and months, as in, they're 18 months and they don't have their first word, that would be something that we would want to investigate or look a little bit more into. So it's still, when the research shows is that within the normal range, boys talk a little bit later than girls, but it's not just that boys talk later, so let's just wait and not intervene.
Right.
So I
Let's
think
not just
it's
write it off.
exactly. So I think it's one of those things where like they got the big picture, right? The big picture kind of like title that jumped out, but then we have to look into the research and see really how it's nuanced, right? Like what the explanation is behind that statement. So overall, that is not true. Can talk about. Oh, here's a really good one. So AAC. So AAC is augmentative alternative communication. So it can look like a lot of things. It can look like writing. It can look like using sign language. It can look like using a communication device, like a speech generating device, which is where you press a button and then it says a word. So there's this misconception that using AAC delays language. So I will have a lot of kiddos who come into my practice and I like to assess at 3 months and 6 months to see really where we are, right? We're using all of our strategies. We're using absolutely everything that we can. At 3 months, if I'm like, we're really not making any progress, I'm going to start introducing AAC. And lots of parents tend to think just kind of like sign language. Well, if we introduce AAC, doesn't that mean that they won't want to talk, right? And
Like, are we
especially,
giving up on those skills that you think are taking too
yeah,
long to achieve? That's fun. Yeah.
exactly. And what we always want to do is make sure that the child has a way to be able to express their immediate wants and needs, right? And so I will propose using a communication device, and that's kind of like the highest that you can go in terms of AAC. But it's always great to give the child the most dynamic form of communication. So an AAC device is great. And what the research shows, again, is that because the child has access to the picture, right, like the little icon, so they have that visual, that kind of like a pictograph, and they have access to the word. And when they touch the button, it says the word, right? They have access to three modalities that's helping them with word associations. They actually learn language faster. So I've actually had kiddos who have used communication devices in our first 3 months for like the first 3 to 6 months. And then like a couple months later, they'll say mama, or they'll say, I want milk, right? And so it's not expected that a communication device or that using AAC will delay language, right? It's actually the opposite. It's been shown to support spoken language.
Very interesting. I did not
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah. And then, okay, I think there's also a caveat, right? There are some children who are non-speakers, right? And then they will end up using communication devices long term. But I think it's important to kind of weed out which children will kind of use communication devices long term. But the goal is always spoken language for many families.